Yeah, welcome Stephen and Francesco to our Building with Blockchain for Web 3.0 class. Stephen and Francesco work for AnChain.AI, which was in our first cohort for the Berkeley Blockchain Accelerator. And the founder and CEO is Victor Feng, who's a PhD in AI and machine learning. He previously worked at quite a few Silicon Valley companies. He led the AI effort for FireEye, which is a famous cybersecurity company. And then he had this insight that it would be great if we could offer those same tools to blockchain networks. So AnChain.AI, if you look them up, they offer a suite of solutions to help blockchain solutions stay compliant, meet anti-money laundering or know your customer requirements, or investigate fraud. So what Stephen and Francesco will be talking about today is their investigation tool that investigates kind of threats to blockchain networks, and they'll illustrate that with some examples. So I'm very excited to welcome them and have them share those tools with you. We also have some of our current accelerator teams joining the call today. So you'll see some new faces joining us as well from all over the world. So welcome to the accelerator teams that are joining here today too. And I will let Stephen and Francesco take it away.
Absolutely. I think we'll just do a quick intro. Of course, you've already done a wonderful job just laying out our general mission, but I am Stephen. I run the marketing and community side of AnChain.AI. And of course, I'll be sort of running the show on the presentation here. Overall, as far as AnChain.AI is concerned, we work on the regulatory and security side of blockchain and cryptocurrency, which, although it may not be the most fun application of cryptocurrency, is becoming more and more essential as regulation is becoming more stringent. So our goal is really to help VASPs, virtual asset service providers, and other industries servicing cryptocurrency or blockchain spaces operate without fear of regulation, giving them tools that make that whole process much less difficult to deal with. So that's our primary and overarching goal, and I'll give Francesco a chance to introduce himself as well, and then we'll jump right into the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I'll be real brief because Stephen touched all the important points. I'm Francesco. I'm working as a product manager at AnChain. I see some familiar faces actually here from other classes, but I graduated from Berkeley last year, and I'm now in between the engineering and the sales and marketing teams here at AnChain. And Stephen is the real teacher today. I'll be touching a couple of things as needed. Good to be here. Thanks, Jocelyn, for the invite.
All right, fantastic. In that case, I think we're good to go. Now, of course, my understanding is that you guys are already pretty much experts on the crypto side of things, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what crypto is or how it's used. But of course, if any questions do arise during the presentation, feel free to just chime in. Francesco, if something comes up in the chat and I miss it, feel free to just chime in and let me know, and I'll stop and we can do some quick discussion there.
Sounds good.
All right, cool. Can everyone see my screen without issue?
Yeah, we can see it.
Fantastic. So what we're going to be talking about today is really how people exploit cryptocurrency, and perhaps more importantly, how we help people stop that, and how we ease the process of reducing the presence of these sorts of illicit activities on the blockchain at not only sort of the enterprise level, but also at the regulatory level. Now, of course, this is going to incorporate some elements of services we offer, but our goal is to instill some knowledge that is very generalized and very broadly applicable to any forensics product you might end up using if you choose to go into crypto industry. So first and foremost, we're going to look at hacks, vulnerabilities, and how we investigate various forms of illicit activity on the blockchain, and how you can apply this knowledge to your own explorations on the blockchain if you do encounter any of these activities, although hopefully you never do. Now, of course, first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay out how these hacks happen. Of course, I'm sure you guys are already kind of familiar with the sorts of bad things that can go on with cryptocurrency, but of course, we encounter these every day, and they're all a little bit different, even though they follow a very similar pattern. So first things first, let's answer some fundamental questions about why criminals use crypto. And if you guys have any knowledge about that, if you guys want to chime in about why you guys think criminals might use crypto, you can do that now, and then we'll just go over some of our perspectives as well.
I can see some comments in the chat there, Stephen, in response to your question.
Let me find the comments. I'm trying to work between these two screens here. One moment. Can you see them, Francesco?
Yeah, people are saying money laundering, not traceable, no face, no case, anonymity, lack of surveillance.
All right, perfect. I mean, you guys are pretty much spot on. But at the same time, we want to dive into each of those and also talk about how some of those are myths and that we can actually do a lot more as far as tracing cryptocurrency as one might expect. So first and foremost, of course, we're going to lay out the three pillars, and you guys pretty much touched on all of these already. First and foremost, we have pseudonymity. Second of all, we have moderate liquidity. And third of all, we have low traceability. And just based on those names, you guys, I'm pretty sure, have a very good idea of what we're about to talk about. Now, first and foremost, of course, we're going to be talking about pseudonymity. Of course, although users can access details about transactions, there's no necessity of any identifying information tied to a blockchain wallet address. However, it's a common misconception that blockchain networks are completely anonymous, when in fact they're only confidential. And when you interact with entities on the blockchain these days, particularly when it comes to cryptocurrency exchanges and other regulated entities, you do, of course, volunteer some information about yourself. And simply by doing that, you create sort of traceable items that we can then assign to a wallet used to track someone's identity. Second of all, we have moderate liquidity. And of course, as cryptocurrency picks up in the economy and it becomes more and more popular, it becomes much easier to go from cryptocurrency to fiat currency, or even to use cryptocurrency to buy other currency or to buy other products. And of course, finally, we have low traceability. Now, if you guys have ever used the Blockchain Explorer, especially with limited experience, you guys probably already know it's not exactly the easiest thing to do. The interface is not what we would call intuitive. And especially if you're tracking through a large number of transaction hops, things will get very difficult very quickly. Of course, this is kind of an intended feature of the blockchain. Many people consider this to be a plus of cryptocurrencies as a whole, that it's very difficult to trace their activities. However, with newer forensics tools, we're finding that it can be much, much easier to track things down in this way, especially when it comes to looking at crypto laundering type activities or any other sort of funds moving around that have to do with criminal activities like hacks or other sorts of compromises. Now, as far as the eras of cryptocurrency, and this is kind of what people think about cryptocurrency as a whole, that it's the Wild West and there are no rules, you do whatever you want. And if you steal money, it's just yours, first come, first serve. Now, this was kind of true for a long time, as many of you are probably familiar with. In the early days of crypto, if you did steal something, there's a good chance they would never catch you. And a lot of cryptocurrency was lost in those early days of crypto and simply never recovered. And perhaps one of the most infamous exchange hacks of those early days was the Mt. Gox hack. Now, Mt. Gox was a Tokyo-based cryptocurrency exchange that operated between 2010 and 2014. And at its peak, it was responsible for more than 70% of Bitcoin transactions. Now, over the course of a couple of years, they got hacked again and again and again for about 450 million total Bitcoin over the course of several years. Now, this is kind of characteristic of that entire early period of Bitcoin, those first 4 to 5 years, during which regulations were extremely sparse. KYC was kind of a joke. And when you registered for an exchange, you didn't really need to volunteer all that much information. At the time, our forensics capabilities really couldn't keep up with anyone who happened to be doing anything illicit on the blockchain. So this is pretty much the pinnacle of irresponsibility as far as cryptocurrency goes. Moving on from there, and this is sort of more in recent times, we had the BitThumb exchange hack, which was a Korean exchange, at the time the 6th busiest cryptocurrency exchange. And they were hit for about 60 million over the course of several hacks. And then a total of about $500 million over the course of, again, several compromises. Now, as far as exchange scams go, that was only kind of the beginning. In addition to those, you guys may remember the ICO era. And during that period of time, ICOs were both extremely successful and extremely fraudulent. At any given time, if you were investing in an ICO, you had a good chance of either making a ton of money or making no money and people just sort of running off with your cash. To the extent that ICOs were banned in a number of jurisdictions and remain banned to this day in a number of jurisdictions. So all of that is meant to sort of characterize the perceptions of cryptocurrency, things that kind of linger to this day. Now, of course, these days we're much more diligent about tracking these sorts of things down. And so let's talk about how we can break this down into individual steps and use those steps to identify and ultimately sort of act on these illicit transactions. Now, as far as the life cycle of an illicit Bitcoin, at some point, this Bitcoin becomes involved in some sort of illicit activity. Maybe someone discovers the private key to your wallet, or maybe someone logs into your exchange account and drains the money, or at a larger scale, maybe someone somehow gets access to an exchange wallet and manages to drain huge amounts of cryptocurrency. From then on, their main goal is, of course, not to get caught. So they will use a variety of services to do that. First and foremost, you can access what's called a mixer, and some of you guys may have used mixers before. In essence, mixers are passing funds back and forth between wallets, combining funds in such a way that it makes it very difficult to track the chain of custody, and we'll talk a little bit more at length about those later. Once they do that and they've moved the money through a number of wallets that, of course, are very easy to create in the cryptocurrency space, they will often hold on to that money for an extended period of time before liquidating it, thus making it very difficult to keep track of something over a long period of time since they can liquidate at any time. And prior to very recently, there was really no way to be made aware of the fact that they had moved the funds suddenly, by which time it might be gone. And of course, the final step is the liquidation to fiat currency. As it is, it's still rather difficult to spend Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies on actual goods. And so the goal of most criminals is to eventually liquidate to some sort of government issued currency. And here's just a little bit more of an elaboration of how people do that. Number one is, of course, mixers, which we've already talked about. Number two, and we've already covered this a little bit, they will just move it through such a huge number of wallets that it becomes inconvenient to track it with a traditional blockchain explorer. Especially, of course, if you break up the funds and then recombine them further down the road, a traditional blockchain explorer is simply not built to handle this sort of tracing. There are also non-compliant exchanges which do not collect any KYC info, so you will not actually have to attach your identity to your account. And in those cases, you can basically just liquidate without anyone ever knowing who exactly you are. And of course, there are also privacy coins, which are unique low liquidity cryptocurrencies that allow a user to gain total anonymity when making blockchain transactions. However, most exchanges do not offer support for these privacy coins for exactly the reason that it's a big hit to your credibility if you do so. As far as the different types of mixing services, they're custodial and non-custodial. And a custodial mixing service actually does take possession of your funds while they do the mixing, while technically a non-custodial service does not. This is kind of a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference as far as legality is concerned, because if they actually take possession of the funds and then mix them afterwards, they're essentially a money laundering service and therefore illegal in the vast majority of jurisdictions. And in fact, some of those mixers have already been cracked down on in the United States and other regions. Now, as far as law enforcement and how we go about stopping this, there are a couple of examples that we want to go through. First and foremost, of course, you guys are probably familiar with KYC. If you guys have ever signed up for a Coinbase account or anything of that nature, you've had to volunteer a great deal of identifying information so they can make sure that you're not a sketchy individual. And all of that is for the purpose of making sure that if something does get tracked back to the exchange, they can then attach that to a real person. Now, you may have heard about these sorts of things happening in which an exchange does not stringently check these things, and in which KYC information is actually kind of a worthless endeavor. But recently, organizations like FATF and FinCEN have cracked down on that in the United States as well as abroad in order to ensure that the KYC information is actually of use to law enforcement. Of course, there is a overarching global compliance effort spearheaded by FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And they're responsible for cracking down on global money laundering and terrorist financing as a whole. Each year, they set international standards that aim to prevent these sorts of activities, and their recommendations are generally observed by the vast majority of member countries. And of course, if you don't do that, they will publicly shame you and talk about how non-compliant you are at their next meeting. And of course, there are also nation-specific regulations. Each nation will have their own regulatory body for virtual currencies. And some of them take much more of a lenient stance, while others outright ban the use of cryptocurrency entirely. It really depends on where you are. Now, of course, there are some challenges associated with this. Of course, combating the financing of terrorism is one of the primary issues that we face today. Many terrorist organizations have taken to utilizing cryptocurrency as a means of receiving funds from donors around the world. And this is really the big one that will get your virtual asset service provider nailed if you happen to be facilitating this sort of transaction. All members of FATF are expected to upgrade their laws, regulations, enforcement, etc., to ensure that this does not happen. And we've seen recent examples of FinCEN cracking down on people for facilitating these sorts of transactions from as far back as 2014. So at this point, almost a decade ago, if you were facilitating these transactions and did not take any action to report them, you could still be paying fines for things that happened a long time ago. Of course, there are privacy coins, and as previously discussed, these coins have built-in mechanisms to hide data about their users. You may have heard of some of them, like say Monero. These are, of course, utilized to protect the privacy of the person using the coins, and these are very popular when it comes to transactions on black markets and when dealing with illicit product. Now, of course, government regulation has really cracked down on these in recent years, and these days you will very rarely find these sorts of coins offered on a traditional exchange. And of course, as previously discussed, we have our FATF compliance recommendations. Failing to comply with these regulations has various consequences depending on where you are. The United States is particularly strict, and FinCEN and other local organizations will crack down fairly substantially if you are found to be facilitating any money laundering efforts or the funding of terrorism. And of course, the classic crypto laundering. Now, people use this for all sorts of things, big and small, be it an exchange hack or simply you stealing someone else's hardware wallet. The whole idea is, of course, to legitimize these funds as quickly as possible and ensure that no one can trace these back to the original source of illicit activity. Now, crypto laundering is a huge problem, and at this point, it's accounting for almost 10% of all money laundering activity, which is fairly substantial, we would say. And at the rate that it's continuing to grow, we expect that it's going to become a larger and larger problem as time goes on, especially given how quickly cryptocurrency has caught on in this past year. And finally, we have the international safe havens. Now, if you've been dealing with any sort of cryptocurrency vendor in the past couple of years, you may notice that a lot of them are sort of domiciled in countries that you would normally not think about, something like the Seychelles or Cyprus or something like that. And the reason for this is these countries have very lax regulations as it pertains to cryptocurrency. And in fact, they are noted in the FATF handbook for being particularly non-compliant. Now, of course, there is no specific prohibition or regulation under Seychelles law against, say, opening a bank account by an ICO project, conducting a token sale, crypto fiat exchanges, crypto exchanges, and tokenized funds. And they allow a whole host of gambling and other sort of borderline activities under the Seychelles Gambling Act of 2014. These are increasingly problematic, of course, since many exchanges domiciled in these regions have extremely lax KYC and are otherwise mostly compliant or mostly non-compliant, depending on how they feel like dealing with regulations at any given time. So we always have to pay special attention to that. Some exchanges in this category include, say, Binance, which is one of the largest exchanges in the world. Now, as far as the cryptocurrency legal policies, these vary from nation to nation. So we'll just sort of quickly gloss over a couple of these and discuss how things differ from place to place. Of course, we have a couple of categories. We have some countries which completely ban cryptocurrencies, some which have a domestic ban, which simply bar their own citizens from engaging in these sorts of activities. We have some countries which are particularly strict. We have some which have what we call indirect restrictions, some that are completely friendly to cryptocurrency, and some that are actually so supportive that they're encouraging themselves and their own citizens to develop digital currencies and/or cryptocurrencies. And of course, there are countries that simply decide, hey, cryptocurrency is not a big deal, although this is mostly changing in the past few years. And there are some countries that go as far to accept cryptocurrency as fiat currency. Now, of course, countries collaborate with local law enforcement to various degrees. In South Korea, we had some fairly controversial activity involving cryptocurrency. Despite the mania for cryptocurrency in South Korea since 2017, public sentiment really took a turn after the 2019 Nth Room case, during which some very sketchy activity was outed involving cryptocurrency payments via Telegram, and a petition to the government to publicly reveal the identities of the users of this illicit service collected 5 million signatures. These sorts of activities really mar the name of cryptocurrency as a whole. And this is a big part of why cryptocurrency has often had such a negative reputation, because it is naturally affiliated with illicit services and products. Of course, you guys may be familiar with other things in that department, like say Silk Road, which we will also discuss a little bit further. And this is sort of more information on that. Following this incident, we did see the complete banning of Monero across a number of exchanges, and this was really the impetus for the crackdown on privacy coins. In addition to that, we have ransomware payments, and you guys may have heard of a couple of these ransomware incidents, like say WannaCry and more recently Ryuk. Ransomware has become such a huge issue as of late that in fact, you can just purchase your own ransomware on the black market and deploy it as you wish. And in addition to that, many ransomware users accept payment primarily in cryptocurrency. The purpose of ransomware, as I'm sure many of you guys are already aware, is basically to make life very difficult for the person under attack by ransomware, either by locking their files, preventing access to the device entirely, or just some other sort of harassment until the ransom is paid to the attacker. In this type of attack, cybercriminals do not profit from the resale of the information at all, but mostly from the fact that they are so annoying that people wish to get back to their work and continue to make money that they will pay this ransom. And per OFAC's November announcement, things have become even more difficult because these days, people are extremely discouraged from paying ransomware at all, because if it just so happens that you pay your ransom to someone who's affiliated with a sanctioned nation or a terrorist organization, you could in fact be paying fines for paying your own ransom. So things have become much more difficult in that respect as well. So of course, we have to find another way to deal with that, and we'll get into that in further detail as well. And finally, just sort of a brief aside as far as what is DeFi. DeFi, you may have heard of, is short for decentralized finance. And this is an umbrella term for a variety of financial applications in cryptocurrency geared towards disrupting financial intermediaries. DeFi draws inspiration from blockchain and is distinct because it expands the use case of blockchain from simple value transfers to more complex financial use cases. One of the most common among these is the decentralized exchange, an exchange in which essentially no one is controlling it, and it is purely algorithmically exchanging one cryptocurrency for another based on their supply. You may have heard of Uniswap, which is probably the most popular of the decentralized exchanges. And of course, these also fall into a huge regulatory gray area. So of course, some of the other applications of DeFi, of course, decentralized exchanges, we have stable coins and lending platforms, wrapped Bitcoins, a way of sending Bitcoin over the Ethereum network, as well as prediction markets and others. Now, one of the big problems with many DeFi outlets is they tend not to collect any KYC information at all. And you can immediately start to see how that might be a problem, especially since most recently, OFAC has recently issued a statement stating that DeFi outlets, decentralized exchanges, stablecoins and the like, may come under the umbrella of its cryptocurrency regulations starting next year. I think we may have a question in here. Francesco, is there a question?
Oh, no, it's just me texting some information. I just texted the URL to Uniswap if people are interested.
Perfect. And now first, we're gonna go ahead and dive into our first demo here. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing for a moment while I switch things over. And in the meantime, if you guys have any questions about that first part, feel free to let me know.
When you said that OFOC, I think you said, was going to make steps towards regulating DeFi, was that the Office of the Currency Controller? Or who was
Well,
that? Sorry.
Status.
Oh, okay. The Financial Action, Task Force. Okay.
Yeah. So they're considering bringing all of that under the same umbrella as other virtual asset service providers. So that's something, of course, that we're trying to keep a keen eye on as well.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the forensics platform in question, and this is our version of the forensics platform. But of course, the same principles I'm about to go over can be applied to any number of tools that are out there right now. Of course, if you guys do want to experiment with this, you can contact us after the class, and we're happy to grant you guys some free access to play around with this. So the real point of these sorts of forensics platforms is to provide a much more intuitive alternative to a traditional blockchain explorer. Now, as we discussed earlier, blockchain explorers tend to be a huge pain to use. The interface is rather clunky, and especially if you're not especially familiar with cryptocurrency, you may find that they're very difficult to use as a whole, particularly as the transaction flow becomes more and more complicated. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll go ahead and just pick a case that was fairly high profile and fairly recent, and something that you guys might be familiar with. So, does anyone remember last summer when a number of particularly prominent Twitter accounts were hacked, and someone put a little message on there that said, hey, send us some Bitcoin and we'll send you twice as much Bitcoin back? I believe that one implicated Elon Musk, it was Apple's Twitter account, Joe Biden's Twitter account, and things like that. Yep. So we did do an investigation into that one, and in fact, we ended up finding most of the money associated with that hack in short order, and we're going to show you exactly how we ended up doing that. Now, first and foremost, we'll go over the broad overview of how this forensics platform works. First and foremost, of course, we just enter the address into that search bar from earlier. And once you do that, you will end up at this screen here that gives you all of the relevant information for that particular address. Now I'm going to go ahead and just start at the top and work my way down. First and foremost, we have the entity category. In this case, this was a scam. Second of all, we have the entity name. In this case, the Crypto for Health scam, also better known as the Twitter hack. And the Crypto for Health name was simply a name assigned to a scam they had previously perpetrated. So in fact, we already had a little bit of a record on these people prior to that Twitter hack. Moving over here and to the left, we can see the Aml Risk score. We're looking specifically for the risk of money laundering activity or any sort of illicit activity as a whole. And in this case, we can immediately see that the scam attribution has bumped up its risk score accordingly. And generally speaking, we recommend that if you see any sort of score above 80, you immediately back away from that address because that indicates some very direct activities relating to illegal activities. Over here, we have a broad overview of all of the relevant information associated with the address. Of course, we have the balance. We have the on-chain transfers, total received, and total sent funds. And here we have a mapping of all of the suspicious transaction chains in which the address has participated, also summarized over here as well. So if we wanted to take a look at any of these in particular, we could simply mouse over these, copy any of these addresses, or just click these to go to these individual addresses as well. And finally, down here, we have our transaction graph, which is a graphical representation of all of the in and outflows for this particular address, also itemized over here on the right. Now, let's say we were performing a new investigation on this address and we were looking to find out how they might have started to liquidate some of these ill-gotten gains. We would go ahead and create a new investigation using this button right here. And in this case, we immediately have two options. We have our transaction graph for a manual trace, and we have an auto trace for a more sort of machine learning and AI-driven tracing. So we'll go ahead and start with the manual trace, just to give you an idea of what you can do with the platform. Now, of course, here we can immediately see that this is just a big blown up version of the graph that we had earlier. And you can see right here, if you look closely, the in and out flows based on the arrow's orientation from this particular wallet. Now, from this point, we can manipulate this however we please. And if we double click any of these individual nodes, they will expand into their own composite transactions. So I imagine you guys can already begin to see how we might use this tool for the purposes of tracing. Now, of course, if we wanted to say, look for how they might be converting to fiat, the first thing we would do is sort them out. And most forensics tools will, of course, have these sorts of features that will allow you to sort by either sender or receiver addresses. In this case, we're going to be looking specifically at receiver addresses, wallets that have received funds from this particular address. And of course, once we sort those out, we can go ahead and just start following the money. Typically, we will just go ahead and take the largest outgoing transactions and go from there and see where we end up. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and take this 5 Bitcoin transaction here, give it a little bit of room to breathe, and give that a double click. And of course, as you can see here, this will expand into its own transactions as well. And we will once again sort by receiver address. Now, of course, you can already see here that not all of these wallets are created equal. This little exclamation point in red triangle here tells us that we have another high risk address that has a history of bad action. And in those cases, we will, of course, set those aside just for further examination down the road. In addition to that, we are going to be looking for the largest transaction. And in fact, it looks like it's going to be that one anyway. So we'll go ahead, move that into the same line as the rest of our investigation, and continue the trail. We'll give that a double click. And then once again, we will sort by receiver address. Now, if I zoom in a little bit, you can already see that some of these addresses are not quite the same as others. And that's because even a sort of tangential transaction with any of these sorts of scams will leave an account flagged for potentially illicit activity for an extended period of time. If someone does end up transacting frequently with one of these illicit addresses, we will see that risk score continue to rise. And once someone gets into the 70 to 80 range, they may even pick up a tag affiliating them with the criminal entity that they're frequently transacting with. This is sort of one of many ways that we track addresses that are not otherwise affiliated with a known entity and sort of assign them identity attributions that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get with traditional scraping tools, like say through Etherscan or blockchain.com. I'm just going to go ahead and check. Perfect. All right, and we'll continue following the money there. And right now we can see it's a fairly simple trace. We're seeing a little bit of the money scrape off with every transaction. And this is very common when we're looking at this sort of activity, because the idea is, of course, to break these apart and then recombine them further down the road. Once again, we have these two options, and we'll take the larger of the two. And here we can see something very familiar to us and something that you may become very familiar with if you choose to do a lot of investigating. And that is this particular outflow breaking up into a number of evenly sized pieces. Now, I imagine you guys can already understand why they might be doing this. And of course, the idea is to make it as difficult as possible to trace. And hopefully you can already imagine how much of a pain this would be if you were on a traditional blockchain explorer, because going down each of these individual pathways would require its own set of click-throughs, all of which could take dozens or even hundreds of transactions to actually reach an endpoint for. Now we'll just go ahead and take one of these, and we'll try and keep ourselves organized as we do. We'll go ahead and give that one a double click. And sort by receiver address. And now we can see that it's been narrowed to a single transaction. So that generally tells us that we're getting close to the liquidation point that we're looking for. At this point, we're looking at a very small amount of money, so we'll be looking for a reconsolidation of funds followed by liquidation to an exchange outlet. And so since we only have one option, let's give that a double click. All right, perfect. So that's the flash of green that we're always looking for when we're doing these investigations. And as you might imagine, these green nodes represent exchanges. Now in this case, I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so we can see. And so now we have this huge 632 BTC outgoing transaction to the Binance exchange. Now immediately the question is, okay, where the heck did we get 632 BTC? Because we started with 5 and 4 and 3. And of course, this is not just a single transaction, but a number of transactions from this particular wallet, which is also consolidating funds from a huge number of other sources. And here, of course, we have the transaction details. So if we want to take a look at that, we can see all of the thousands of transactions that go into this particular liquidation activity. And so this is what we would call a pretty plainly apparent crypto laundering event. And of course, we see all of these very small transactions that are going out to the exchange. And in fact, we have some of these transactions that sort of persist all the way into 2021. If I just continue scrolling here, in fact, I'm going to see if we can track one of them down. Oh, we've got some December 2020s in there. Now, of course, we can take an even better look at this if we go ahead and take this address and then just sort by all. And we can see all of the funds that are coming in from a variety of sources here. And this is really only the tip of the iceberg, only the slightest sort of picture of how all of the funds are coming into this particular wallet. Now, as far as what we're going to do about it, one of the things we can do is get in touch with, say, Binance Exchange. And of course, we have the contact info over here. They may not be the most compliant of exchanges, but when we're working in conjunction with a law enforcement office, they tend to be much more liberal with volunteering the information for the people who might be perpetrating this. And in fact, the Crypto for Health scammers have already long since been arrested and prosecuted. So in fact, that's kind of an open and shut case. Now, of course, we actually missed the step that I talked about during the presentation, which is the holding period. And of course, at this point, this investigation is already over, so there's no more holding going on. But of course, there's always the question of what would we do if they just parked a bunch of money in one of these addresses? I'll sort by receiver address again. They just parked a bunch of money in one of these addresses and said, hey, we're just going to not move it, and it's your job to keep watching it until we decide to move it. Now, in the event that they do want to do that sort of thing, which is of course very difficult for a law enforcement office, which has many cases to deal with, we could then just go to that particular address, go to their own behavior profile, and then use this feature right here to add monitoring to the address. This is something which a lot of the law enforcement offices we work with really enjoy, because it means that as soon as any sort of transaction hits this particular address, or any sort of new intelligence causes its risk score or attribution tag to change, they'll be alerted immediately, so that way they can actually move on to other activities without spending all of that time looking at a single address. Now, of course, that's sort of an awful complicated way to go about things, and as I already mentioned, this is really only one branch of that investigation. So if we wanted to take another look at it, but let's say do it a little bit faster, how would we then go about that? And of course, we have AI in our company name, so you know it's got to come in here somewhere. So of course, I'm going to go back there and we're going to try out that auto trace and see if it's a little bit easier than the manual trace. So as the name of the auto trace would imply, the whole idea of this is that the platform itself is going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So of course, we've got the same addresses before, but now we have all these parameters that we can set for the auto trace. Of course, the time range, the minimum received funds that we're going to trace. In this case, it's by default set to 0.1 BTC, which is actually a lot of money at this point, if you think about it. And of course, the depth and the breadth, the number of hops into which we're going to dig, as well as the number of addresses expanded for each hop. We can, of course, trace both forwards and backwards. Forwards will let us trace the end points or the liquidation points. And backwards we use for fund origin tracing. In case someone comes to us with a wallet and says, hey, I don't know if these funds are clean. Can you trace where they came from and see if there's any sort of illicit history to the funds? And of course, you have the option to either keep things time-bound or not. The whole point of the time-bound is to make sure that all of the tracing makes sense in the context of the chronology of all of these transactions, just to make sure we're not connecting any transactions that didn't actually happen in the order that they might appear in the trace. So we're going to go ahead and dig into this one as a whole. So this is from last summer, so we're going to set it to 1 year just to make sure that we're inclusive of all of its activity. And we're going to set the threshold to 0.01 just to make sure, again, that we're capturing as much activity as possible. We're going to set the number of hops to 20 just to, again, make sure that we're capturing all of the activity. Trace forward towards liquidation because we want to compare it directly to this manual investigation. And then keep things time-bound because, of course, we want things to make sense in the context of how these events played out in real time. And so we'll go ahead and start that trace. Now, the auto trace will typically take a couple of seconds, but it can take as much as a minute or more for particularly complex traces. In this case, lucky for us, it was perfect timing. we will reach this settlement screen in a hurry. Now, there are of course pros and cons to AutoTrace, and I'll talk about those a little bit more as we dive into this. But all we need to know first and foremost is that we've traced 12.83 BTC leaving from this specific address, and we've settled 5.63 of it, broken down into all of these channels here. So we know exactly where a significant portion of this cryptocurrency ended up, and some of it is still sitting in holding wallets in various locations. Now, if I go ahead and switch to visualization mode, we can see the transaction pathways here. And if you want to just take a second and imagine how much of a pain it would be to use a blockchain explorer to lay out a transaction map like this, please go ahead and do so, because we used to do that once upon a time, and it was really quite the nightmare. Now, at a glance, you guys can probably already see some little interesting colored dots here, and we'll go ahead and zoom in so we can take a closer look. Of course, we have the cryptocurrency exchanges scattered throughout here. Naturally, that's something that we want to take into account when we're looking at any sort of potential money laundering activity. In addition to that, we have, of course, other illicit entities. In this case, we actually have an app wallet, a Luno app wallet. These guys are based in Africa. And of course, if an exchange or app wallet does frequently engage in illicit activity, they too are not immune to being flagged as potentially risky actors within the system. And perhaps most importantly, we have this little yellow thing right here, which is actually the central hub of a mixer network of wallet addresses. Now, you can probably already see as I zoom out where the mixers come into play here, as you see sort of the splitting and the recombining of funds throughout this map. And this is one of the unique capabilities of the AutoTrace as a whole, which is to sort of visualize how the mixer might be acting and establish clear chains of custody if we want to actually, say, pursue an individual who's involved in this case. Now, how might we do that? You might ask, because this does look kind of complicated, and I understand. And for that, we've kind of simplified things as if you want to look at this endpoint and you want to see how we got these funds here from the origin, we just go ahead and give that a click. And the system is kind enough and gracious enough to highlight the whole pathway for us if we want to look into each of those individual transactions and establish a clear chain of custody in the event that we're participating in a criminal investigation. Of course, that traces all the way back, including through all of the mixer transactions. And this is something that would be very valuable, say, in our previous collaborations with law enforcement and government regulators. And once again, if you want to get in touch with these guys, you can give this a click. And of course, click this little button right here for all of their contact info so you can ring them up and talk about how much sort of bad activity is going on their exchange. Now, of course, we can already kind of see the pros and cons here. We're just dealing with way less money when it comes to the AutoTrace. And that's because the AutoTrace is only tracing funds that originate from this specific wallet. And you guys probably still remember when we were doing the manual trace that we're taking into account all of these funds that are coming from outside of that specific wallet. That would be the main difference. But of course, if we're just looking to establish a chain of custody, the AutoTrace is a much faster way to do that. So each of them has their strengths and weaknesses, and we tend to use both of them together to establish a clearer case as far as prosecuting or investigating goes. Now, that's sort of just a quick overview of what the tool can do. So I'm going to get back into the presentation. But if any of you guys have any questions about how this thing works or any other features that you would like to sort of expand upon, of course, we're happy to sort of pause and expand here.
Can you talk a little bit, Stephen, about who's using this tool? Like, is it US regulatory bodies? Are there any hedge funds or exchanges? Or I know you have some of those as customers, but was wondering who uses this specific tool the most in your customer base.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we kind of have three categories of vendors, three categories of customers that we service. So first and foremost is those VASPs, the cryptocurrency exchanges. We work with them to establish exactly what might be happening on their network, what sorts of illicit activity might be taking place there, and also to keep track of any incoming funds or wallets, people that are coming into their system, to make sure that there's no sketchy activity affiliated with those people before they even sign up. In addition to that, we work with hedge funds who similarly want to make sure that the funds coming into their system are not of illicit origin. So for them, we actually do a lot of the fund origin tracing that I was talking about earlier, just so we can see where the money is coming from and if they've previously been involved in anything that could get them in trouble further down the road. And third of all, this is probably the really obvious use case. We collaborate with government organizations like the FBI, as well as a variety of international law enforcement outfits, in ensuring that we can track down any sort of this crypto laundering or otherwise sort of illicit activity. Now, of course, that might be something as simple as, say, a COVID-related scam, which we were actually working on last year when someone was pretending to sell masks and other medical equipment, taking crypto as payment and just never delivering it. Or it might be something a little bit more serious, like say an exchange that is facilitating a lot of money laundering activity. And of course, we can help them establish a clear sort of picture of what that money laundering activity looks like and prove that they are not only sort of facilitating the crypto laundering activity, but that there's a clear chain of custody that sort of links them to all of that activity and wallets within their system. So that's sort of a brief overview of the sorts of things that we will sort of provide as far as services and software. And yeah, that's kind of the broad overview.
Yeah, that's helpful to understand kind of the range of your customers. Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, I had a question. What happens if someone uses like a decentralized exchange or like another privacy first chain like a Tornado Cash or Monero?
Yeah, so as far as privacy coins are concerned, that one is still really the black box and no one is really able to effectively trace those right now. However, Tornado Cash and other smart contracts we handle just like any other mixer, and we can view not only all of the inputs, but the associated outputs. So just like with this mixer address over here, Tornado Cash is handled the same way within this system, such that if we expand the node, then we can see all of the in and outflows and then establish the similar chain of custody. Now, of course, there's always a little bit of muddiness when it comes to exchanges, but by and large, that's how we approach the issue.
Okay, but if it's a decentralized exchange, it won't be like a, I mean, the graphs won't be on the single blockchain, right? You'll be having across different blockchains.
Yeah, so we actually do support ERC20 tokens. And we're actually updating that right now. Otherwise, I would show you guys. But yeah, when we do work on an Ethereum blockchain address, I just want to show you the option here. We can actually trace through a multitude of currencies. So depending on which currency they're using, we can actually go through that entire pathway as well. So yeah, we're in the middle of an update now on ETH. Otherwise, I would have given you a demo on that one. But yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
We can actually show something, Stephen. I can send you the link.
Oh, perfect. Actually, do you want to just jump in real quick, Francesco, or of course you can share the link as well.
Sure.
And yeah, as far as people in our space, yeah, CipherTrace is doing things similar to what we're doing. You guys have probably heard of a couple of these forensics tools. So yeah, if you do end up working in the space, you might be using any number of these forensic software options. So of course, we want to keep things as general as possible, just to make sure that these skills kind of apply to whatever platform you end up using. And it is kind of funny because every single one of these providers has a slightly different game plan as far as how they do their intelligence. Our big thing is, of course, tracing through smart contracts and also the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning for doing the labeling of things that can't be scraped. And various sort of vendors have different approaches to how they provide their exclusive intelligence. And it's really just a matter of using all of them. And naturally, we're all very secretive about how we go about it. So unless you've used all of the platforms, it's actually difficult to do a direct comparison. And yeah, Francesco, did you want to just share and do a quick demo though?
Sure.
All right, fantastic. Let me go ahead and stop sharing so you can jump in.
Hey, Stephen, I think you had another question in the chat from Richard. Scoring mechanisms for exchanges.
Yes, we do have sort of an external outlet, which is keeping track holistically of each of the exchanges. And we're looking to plug that one into the tool soon, because that's one of the most frequently requested sort of features to understand, hey, is this exchange as a whole kind of sketchy? So that's one of the immediate action items sort of on our list. And broadly speaking, people actually do already kind of have a generalized understanding of which exchanges are the sketchiest. So you might already imagine that, hey, Coinbase is really up there, generally on the up and up, whereas say Binance, maybe not so much, OKEX, maybe not so much, Luno, maybe not so much. But yeah, we are looking to attach a number to that as well. I believe there's one more question in there. Let me see if I can grab that. Yeah, as far as the BTC to LBTC tracing, that's something I would have to talk to the tech team about, but it's always something that we're looking to apply to our system because we consider it one of our strengths to sort of track between chains. That said, yeah, I would have to talk to the technical team about the specifics on that, but thank you for asking. In fact, if you want to sort of revisit that question, feel free to email us afterwards and we're happy to have a conversation there.
I believe you touched on all the questions, right, Stephen? So I'm gonna go ahead and show, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so here I wanted to show you, like here we're basically exploring the Ethereum blockchain, right? This is an Ethereum address and sending and receiving Ethereum, right? And this is related to the KuCoin hack that happened last September, which involved several hundred millions of dollars stolen from the KuCoin exchange. And here you can see, basically, I'm looking at the KuCoin hacker that stole the money from the KuCoin exchange, and you can see how many tokens were stolen from KuCoin, right? You can see there's literally hundreds of tokens that were stolen from the exchange. But like, I'm just gonna go ahead and show you like an example on USDT, right? And I believe I can get all the way to Uniswap to show you how decentralized DeFi is actually used, right? So here in USDT, there were around 20 millions that were stolen. USDT is a stable coin, of course, tethered. So you can, it's back to the dollar. And here, by just exploring the money trace, I'm just gonna open a couple of these as well. And Uniswap should pop up at a certain point here. You can see this is like a Uniswap address. Of course, it's a little hard to understand, exactly to which other token they're swapping these coins, right? You would need to go and check other tokens, but we're planning on adding some other capabilities to advance the visualization. At the moment, you can see that this address is liquidating money through Uniswap. And this is like kind of like frequent, right? Hackers of this kind, they don't just use Uniswap or other decentralized applications, but they use a combination of the two. So if we keep going ahead and explore the money trace, we'll definitely end up into, as you can see here, right? Some other centralized solution of like liquidating funds. Here they liquidated 5 million through Binance, for example, 4 million. All right, Stephen, I know you wanted to go back to the course, right? I believe like you touched the points that were asked.
Yeah, one moment. Let me just load it up again. And this is really just to wrap up, since I know we're kind of running short on time a bit here. So let me go ahead and go back to sharing my screen here. All right, since we are a little bit short on time, of course, I'm going to dive back into the software first at some point, but I just want to go over some of the hands-on investigation and forensics and kind of what different types of investigations might look like. Now, of course, we've showed you guys the scams already, and we've showed you the KuCoin hack as well. Thank you, Francesco. So we're just going to sort of breeze through a couple of those. So first and foremost, one of these is an investigation of sort of WannaCry ransomware. These are just sort of screenshots from the software, and you can kind of begin to see the different architecture of each of these sorts of activities and varying levels of sophistication as far as laundering go. So this one's pretty straightforward. Of course, we're seeing the various branches. We're seeing funds peel away, and we're seeing them liquidate accordingly. But by and large, as far as transactions go, these are pretty straightforward transactions, and you could probably do something like this with the traditional blockchain explorer. It might just be a pain, but of course you can still do it. As far as things that go beyond that, once you really start bringing mixers into things, you can immediately see how things get a whole lot more difficult. Now, this is a manual trace versus an auto trace, but as far as mixers are concerned, it can become very difficult to perform a manual trace, and even an auto trace will tend to produce a much more complicated transaction map. Of course, we have security breaches like KuCoin, and you just saw that one. And here we have a huge assortment of criminally affiliated wallets dealing with this particular sort of pool of funds. And of course, that, as you might imagine, complicates things much further, because we then need to explore all of those individual wallets as well, just to make sure that we're capturing as much of the funds as possible. And of course, in the case of KuCoin, as Francesco already sort of detailed, we were dealing with a huge amount of money. And finally, we have the Twitter hack, and even a relatively simple hack, which really didn't involve that much money, ends up producing a huge number of endpoints. Now, this was actually when we were still live on the investigation. So this is prior to any big liquidating activity. And you can see how quickly the funds really split up into all of these different pools. And this isn't even including a lot of the smaller pools. So utilizing the auto trace really simplifies these sorts of investigations. And then of course we can go in afterwards with the manual trace to track down any remaining funds. But this is just to illustrate how quickly the funds can break up. This is within days of the initial sort of scam itself. So you can see just sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different pools here. And in today's BTC, this is actually worth a whole lot more money, since at the time Bitcoin was not $60,000. It was more like $6,000. Of course, I think I see a little question here. Let's see if I can open that one up. All right, let's see. Thanks, Francesco. And now we're going to go back into the tool, and one more time as we go get into our sort of final few minutes, I'm going to dive into another investigation and just sort of illustrate how an investigation might go on the ransomware end of things. So let me just go ahead and open that one up. And I'll share my screen one more time, and then we'll let you guys go. So of course, here we're looking at one of the more infamous instances of ransomware, WannaCry ransomware. We have all of these same parameters here. Of course, we have the risk score. Naturally, WannaCry gets a 100. And we have the full overview of all of the funds that have flowed through this particular wallet, including the total received, the total sent. And this wallet has continued to be active until fairly recently. And strangely enough, despite the infamy, WannaCry in the grand scheme of things has not actually been all that successful as far as ransomware is concerned. So it just goes to show that even smaller scams and smaller schemes on cryptocurrency can quickly become very, very complicated. And you can see just by looking at this, how many different addresses have picked up elevated risk scores just because they're receiving funds from WannaCry ransomware, or all of these ones that might have been paying to WannaCry ransomware. If you pay multiple times, that will still flag you, simply because you might end up getting flagged for funding terrorist activities or sanctioned individuals. Now we're going to go into the transaction graph, and we'll just go ahead and start expanding and try to illustrate just how difficult things can get, even with a forensics tool. And that just sort of goes to show how difficult it was prior to the existence of some of these forensics tools. So we can see this one's flagged as a forwarding agent, and we use that for any wallet that has a history of manipulating funds on behalf of a criminal entity. And we can immediately start to see, again, the funds are really peeling off little by little. But of course, not all investigations are so straightforward, and we might see that things circle back. We might see that funds reach dead ends. And in this case, that might be the case. And this one looks like it's going to expand quite a bit. So give the system a second to load that one in. And in the meantime, since we are sort of closing things out, if you guys have any final questions, of course, we're happy to answer them. I believe Jocelyn has all of our emails, so if you guys have anything sort of you want to talk to us directly about, please feel free to reach out there. And yeah, you can see just the huge amounts of money that we're dealing with regards to WannaCry ransomware. things really quickly go off the rails. And really, this is only one expansion. So if we were to continue to go down this road, we already have 1,000 transactions to deal with here. But we would already suspect that this 8.72 BTC transaction would be of a similar size and scale. So that would, of course, present its own complexities with regards to the investigation. But I won't quite go down that rabbit hole because I'm sure you guys have other things to take care of today. So that concludes our organized presentation for now. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to ask us. And of course, we're happy if you guys want to jump on the platform, we're happy to offer free demos for you guys just to play around with, or hey, you might end up using it at some point if you go into the crypto industry. So that covers the basics. And yeah, if you guys feel compelled to reach out to us, Jocelyn, I think, is happy to provide our contact information. And if you guys have any questions and you do want to ask them, we'll try and answer as many as we can before you have to jump off.
Thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. Really appreciate it. And also thank you for all the links in the chat. Let's see if the students or anybody from the teaching team or the guests have any questions. I do like some of the comments in there. That was next level. Overview.
Thanks, Kirby.
Good stuff.
I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. Again, I'm a humanities, social science person, so all of this information just overwhelms me for the first time. And yeah, I know this gave me a lot of concrete things to think about in terms of like safety and security. Like there's this whole conception to me before this presentation that blockchain was totally safe, untraceable, you know, but that's cool that there's a ways to be accountable, because I remember I used to do a lot of advocacy work on like commercially sexually exploited youth in the city of Oakland, and child pornography is a very huge deal, especially in the Bay Area, because of the high level of technologists in the area who can kind of do some of these secretive things. So I just want to elevate the work that you're doing, and it's super important because that is the danger with blockchain, is some of the underworldly things that could go on.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that we want to resolve as far as cryptocurrency, is take away some of those sharp edges that prevent people from embracing the technology. So absolutely, that's something that we focus on. And do the scammers ever initiate bank transfers? Definitely at some point, although our tracking does not transition into fiat at this point. Of course, we're looking to engage in partnerships that would allow us to expand our ability to trace into that sort of domain. But at this point, it's sort of outside our realm of expertise.
What would you need to do to be able to see fiat banks transfers out of, you know, from exchanges into fiat banks?
As far as that's concerned, it's generally sort of partnerships with the banks themselves, really, and that's something that we've been pursuing, and I think the whole industry is pursuing a sort of interweaving of those technologies right now. So the goal is, of course, that we would really legitimize crypto moving forward. Help sort of take away some of the barriers to entry there that make people suspicious of the technology. And that's something that we sort of predict to happen in the next year or so. So with more and more traditional financial institutions jumping in, we're very hopeful for a resolution to some of the remaining problems that exist in cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that's
you could
great
be able
to
to
hear.
do it also by partnering with centralized exchanges, because like bank transfer happen on centralized exchanges. So that would be another way of doing it.
Right.
I have a quick question. So in the Nakamoto-san's paper, you know, Bitcoin was you know, sort of pitched as the replacement for any and all currency, and you know, pretty soon we'll be buying ice cream and coffee with Bitcoin. Obviously, that's not what happened. It's being used in other use cases, international remittances. Bad guys are using Bitcoin to do bad things, and you know, of course, there are, you know, other situations where people are basically using it as a speculative, you know, hedge. Maybe it's the new gold. Who knows? Considering that, this is kind of the unintended consequence of Bitcoin. What do you think is going to happen to Bitcoin? What will it become down the road?
That's a really good question, and I feel like we're always a little bit wary about making predictions about the future of Bitcoin because it has this tendency to really defy our expectations. That said, it's been the linchpin for cryptocurrency as a whole for a long time now. And so a lot of people view it as kind of the flag bearer for crypto as a whole to tell us sort of where the high water mark is for the whole industry. That said, again, really hard to say. It has this tendency to buck our expectations. If Francesco, if you wanted to add anything. And also I see Victor has joined us now. So Victor, you might want to chime in for this question we've got in the chat about what kind of database technology we're utilizing.
Yeah, definitely. So, which question is that? The one Richard Phillips asked, or what?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, okay.
So if you ever...
Yeah, okay. Hey, first of all, thanks everyone for joining this class. I think it's great. I'm seeing it's very interactive also. So yeah, so Richard is asking about what sort of database technology and all that. So we actually spent the last 2 years building this infrastructure, right? I mean, so it's a mixture of relational database and also NoSQL. Okay, and the rough data size, we right now we laser focus on whatever the market cap is. We cover over 90% of the crypto market cap, right? So that means Bitcoin and Ethereum, including all the stable coins and all that, right? So the data size is roughly about 10 terabytes, and it's growing, right? And with those Ethereum mainnet launch and all that, it's gonna grow very fast. So we make sure that our infrastructure is also scalable on those. But I mean, we're a startup, right? So cost is also a big factor, right? So we don't have a luxury of like Google and all that invest like millions of dollars on infrastructure, right? We have to be very cautious about the cost. But yeah, overall, we're very happy about what we're achieving. And then the demo that you are seeing, Stephen and Francesco demo, was actually all live data, right? So that's actually, yeah, thanks to the team that, yeah, make sure like using all this. There's also a lot of in-memory caching and all that being involved, right, to make sure it's interactive. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it was beautiful to see the tool in action and the demo of it and how it's being, and hear from, Stephen, how it's being used by various entities. So I think really helpful to our students. It kind of, it gives me hope for the industry, right? That we evolve to some regulated kind of world where this can coexist with fiat-based currencies and be a means for exchange. So glad to see this great work. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Jocelyn and Professor Kowalski. Yeah, it's great honor to be here and then showing the technology and all that. Yeah, and then we definitely happy to open up this tool for free for all the Berkeley affiliates. So yeah, if you have a UC Berkeley email, yeah, you should be able to sign up for free.
Yeah, and if you guys need any more info on that, again, I believe Jocelyn will provide our emails for any sort of further discussion. So yeah, we're always available. We're happy to answer questions. Of course, we have a lot of ties to UC Berkeley. So we'll be looking to sort of further the discussion on that. And if people have interest in the technology, we're always happy to engage in discussions on it. So that about covers it. And we don't want to steal any more of your guys' time. So thank you very much, guys. It's really an honor to come here and present to the students.
Yeah, and thank you
Thanks for having us, guys,
for the information on the Bitcoin. Mille grazie.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I believe that covers it. Victor, do you have any closing remarks, or are we good?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, thanks a lot for the opportunity, and I mean, we believe that the tool, the technology we're building is critical, right, to legitimating the entire crypto industry. And then our differentiation, I mean, I saw some of the other competitors' names I already mentioned, right, like CipherTrace, Chainalysis, right? Our mission, right, is slightly different. We believe that we should actually make the tool publicly available, right? So that that's the way to bring the real transparency to the entire ecosystem, other than selling the tool for millions of dollars a year, right? So we actually want to build it, make it more accessible. So yeah, and then you guys are all invited to use the technology, and maybe will land on some investigation. Like Francesco was the guy on that CBS News last year. Okay, he was the guy that doing the work for me, and I spent 10 minutes to the anchor, right, to talk about his Twitter hack last July. So Francisco is the guy doing the work, right? And you guys may using this technology, you guys would be able to run your own investigation, right? And then you may land on Bloomberg or CBS News or whatever, right? So this is what we believe. We should, that blockchain data is publicly available. The technology to investigate, getting all transparency out of the data should be also available for everyone. Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot for the opportunity here, listening and look. Yeah, and everyone here, thanks a lot for the opportunity. Yeah, keep in touch.
Thank
Cool.
you so much, Team AnChain. Great to have you. And I think some of our teams from the accelerator were listening in too, as well, just so you know, and they may reach out to you on Slack as follow-up. So I think there were 4 or 5 teams listening in this evening. So thanks for exposing them to it as well.
Cool, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Cool, thank you.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right. Bye,
Sure.
guys.
Bye.